City Channel Live. We're here at Cyprus Comic Con 2019. We're in just a matter of minutes in Hall A. We're going to have Anthony Daniels, C-3PO from Star Wars, joining us for a press conference Q&A. Stay with us real soon.
Shall we draw these curtains? Just so we can have a private press conference. I'm sorry we couldn't get a bigger room. In all the Star Wars films, I play a character fluent in over 6 million forms of communication. Unfortunately, Greek is not one of them. So everybody speaks English here? Yes? Young lady at the front? Ah, where are you from? Of course. Whereabouts? Luton. Luton Airport. Hello. As you can see, the character I play is on the table. This is a bottle of water. I met George Lucas in 1975, a long time ago. And I'm still performing him, as you know. So I think what would be interesting is if you want to ask me questions, and is that good? So, question.
So, I mean, it's a very basic question, but what's it like being a part of, in my opinion, the greatest movies of all time?
It's actually, what is it like to be part of one of the greatest pieces of entertainment over all this time? It is an interesting question because when people say, what is it like? What is it like to be in a film? It's hard to say. I don't know what it's like. I'm in it. It's my life. I can't really tell you how that feels. It took some time, many years before, I realized that I never saw Star Wars like everybody else sees it. I'm in it, I'm in this ridiculous costume, I'm uncomfortable, I'm hot, I'm cross, I'm tired, I have to say silly lines, I have to stay in character. And then I see the film, and I watch the film, and there are lots of bits which I don't know about, the special effects which are on computer, scenes that I wasn't in, so I didn't see them being filmed. But for the most part, I watch the film as though watching my day job. And then, because I was the host of an international symphonic tour of John Williams music, up to, I think, 25,000 people in an audience in a big arena, normally about 5,000 to 10,000 every night. And I felt the love, affection, the enthusiasm of Star Wars fans, and I realized that I enjoy Star Wars through the eyes of other people. The fact that you are smiling because you like Star Wars. I see that, and I think that must be good. It must be good if you like it. You look like real people. So I have learned to enjoy Star Wars reflected back at me. Does that make sense? And that, I can tell you, feels rather wonderful and rather, sounds silly, but rather humbling, because I am a tiny little part of it. But I know that I am a tiny part of a huge thing. So in answer to your question, it feels good. Another question. Young lady from England, from Luton.
I haven't thought of one. No.
You haven't thought of one?
Star Wars geek. I have about 1 million questions. My first one is, how many different C-3PO costumes have there been?
Okay, originally there were 6, and we needed 6 because they kept breaking. Because It had taken 6 months to create the costume at Elstree Studios. They were mostly made out of fiberglass, which is a fairly difficult material. It shrinks in the curing, it is scratchy, horrible, the chemicals, horrible. But regularly during a scene in those first films, I would move forward and there would be this strange sort of sound, and it would be like the leg here had split right down the scene, because they made the costume, beautiful though he is, looks beautiful still, but it is solid. And the human body fluctuates, it moves from here to there, a bit of tissue, muscle, whatever. It changes and adapts. There was very little room to adapt, so that if I stepped forward and all these muscles contracted, suddenly whoosh, the suit split apart. You know, and it wasn't my weight that was a problem. They hadn't thought to leave enough space for me to, as it were, breathe within it. So we had 6, and it went on pretty much like that. And then many, many years passed, and we did make little changes to the costume. The first day, it took 2 hours to dress me up. They had a table with all the parts on it, and I stood there, and we started with this bit, and then this bit, and then this bit, and a foot, and this bit, and a foot, and then front and back, and then arm, hand, and then chest, neck, and then finally the head. Think of an Easter egg. Dark chocolate. I don't like milk chocolate. So an Easter egg with 3 holes there. 3 holes here, 1 hole there. It took half an hour to line up each side, because the holes kept moving, and they kept saying, can you lean more this way? And they're still trying. Half an hour to put the head on. Finally, I was ready, and 3PO stepped out into the world. I was talking about it yesterday. It was a major impact on people who were there, absolutely major impact. I was a total star. I was a wonder, a joy. And then I was an object because I had to get to the set. And immediately, this foot. The leg smashed the foot, which then crushed into my foot. So I was being cut by a piece of plastic. It was horrible. I stood there outside the sandcrawler with foam rubber stuffed up my ankle with no shoe on at all. But a thing to remember about movies, if the camera doesn't look at the scene, you don't see it. If it doesn't look at you with your hat, you ain't there in the scene. The young lady here instead, from Luton. And so time went on, we made little changes. Originally the hands were useless. They were just sculptures, if you like. You couldn't pick anything up. You say you picked up the little comlink. Yes, I did. And if you look very carefully, just look at the scene, because what the camera doesn't see, you don't get to see. Watch that scene. You're looking at the comlink on the table. In comes 3PO's hand. He picks it up, and the next thing you see is me standing like that. 2 different shots. Because the first shot, I am only wearing the arm. So the camera is here, it looks at my arm coming in, and you watch, I pat the thing, the little comlink, and pick it up out of shot. I couldn't pick it up. The hands didn't work. So how did we do that? How did we pick up the thing?
Well, on the second shot, when the camera sees you, apparently they stuck it in your hand?
No, because if you watch it, you see me pick it up in the shot. It comes out of shot like that, second shot here. Yes, nearly right. I had a bunch of sticky tape in the palm of my hand. Slap it. It is actually stuck to my hand. This is filmmaking. It's magic. You don't need a computer. And so we move on, and a few years ago, I got a phone call from somebody in America, and the boy said, hi, my name is Kathy Kennedy, and I'm the producer of the new Star Wars movie, and I wondered if it would be okay if J.J. Abrams, he is the director, would it be okay if he phoned you? What would you say? Yeah, I said, all right. I said, that's fine. And he came on the phone eventually and said, would I be in his movie? Again, yes. He said, would you just like to do the voice, have somebody in the costume? And I said, no. He said, quite right. I said, I would like a new costume, absolutely. And then, major breakthrough, the new costume is 3D printed. We all know what that is these days. So it is made of plastic filament that, and the good thing about that is you can change it through CAD programming to make it better. So for instance, and then they thought fixings can be different. And so something that took half an hour to put on now takes 6 seconds. That's it. So in answer to your question, the costume has changed. Some of the original costumes, they're at the Smithsonian Institute, they're in travel exhibits and so on. And I go back and look in the archives at some of the original fiberglass. So heavy, so cumbersome. And yet, unbelievably, I tap danced on the Muppet Show wearing the costume. And you can look at that on YouTube. Put in 3PO, Muppet Show, and I'm literally dancing around the set. These days, not so sure I could do that. Another question. Does that answer your question? Thank you very much.
Going back to the beginning, how did you get to know about Star Wars, and was that the actual role you auditioned for?
How did I get to know about Star Wars in the beginning? It was 1975. I had been acting for 2 years. I'd been to drama school for 3 years, and I was about 28 or 29, I can't remember. And I started life as an actor by winning the BBC Radio Drama Awards on the radio, which put me in the company that did a lot of plays on the radio. And at 6 months later, I went to Watford Palace Theatre for 2 plays and met somebody in the bar on the last night who said, I'm Frank Dunlop, I run the Young Vic Theatre, part of the National Theatre. You were very good. I signed on the dole on Monday, and on Tuesday I got a phone call from his company saying, come with us to Europe, which I did, touring and in the Young Vic in London for 2 years. And it was whilst I was there and at the Criterion Theatre in Piccadilly Circus that my agent said, there's this American, and he's making a low-budget science fiction film, and he wants to see you for the part of a robot. Well, how bad could that offer be? We didn't like Americans very much back then. I don't know why we didn't. They wore stupid plaid trousers, and they were loud, and they had the Vietnam War and all that kind of thing. And I was a serious actor. How dare you offer me the part of a robot, right? And I'm not interested in science fiction. And it's low budget. I wouldn't get paid very much. So I didn't want to see him. She made me go and see him. And the thing you will know is that Ralph McQuarrie's painting in the office, George's office, was so beautiful, so kind of moving, so eloquent. I fell in love with the painting. Then they sent me a script, very difficult to understand. I'd never read a film script before. What I did understand was 3PO, this character, was a delight. He was different from anything I'd ever seen. He was always in the wrong place at the wrong time. He had a friend, a really close friend, and they just would argue all the time, and that was a really clever piece of writing, like The Odd Couple. And so the next day, I went back to meet George again, a little more nervous than the first time. First time I didn't care. And we talked for another hour, and finally I said, please may I play the part? And he went, sure. Which I took to mean yes, because it wasn't really a sound, you know. And the next day, I was at Elstree Studios with almost wearing nothing, being covered in plaster to make a mold of my body that Liz Moore, the sculptor, then created that shape. And then we made Star Wars. 12 weeks in the desert, in the appalling heat of 1976 in London. Only, I think, 2 years ago did it get hotter than that period. It was a heat wave. The roads were melting. There were taps in the street. People were running out of water. And I'm in that studio in that costume, boiling away, would kill me these days. So that's how it started. Another question.
Yes. So you've been part of Star Wars since the beginning, through the original trilogy, then the prequels, now the end of the saga. And I just wanted to ask how that feels being part of this entire journey of Star Wars. And how does it feel now that it's actually coming to an end?
Well, very much like you asked, you know, what does it feel like? And it's kind of a difficult question. Of course, gradually, we made a second film. We made The Empire Strikes Back, then Return of the Jedi, and so on, and that was the end. And that was okay. That was the end. I did other things. I think 16 years passed. I acted some more. I did production stuff. I diversified. And then, of course, a phone call. Always a phone call. We're going to make a prequel. It's a new word for the English language, I think, prequel. And 16 years after the original, it began to be evident that George had originally said there would be 9 stories. Well, that didn't seem it was going to happen. But suddenly we were making 1, 2, 3. So, but still, the distant one seemed long ago. And in the first one, you know, he tells me that I was created by Anakin Skywalker. And I thought that was really cool because Alec Guinness had been so nice to me back then. Great chap. Of course, a few days later, I worked out that Alec Guinness had played the other, because I'm not into the details, you know. It's like 16 years had gone by, and I forget who's who exactly. Too many names. Anakin, Obi-Wan, all that stuff.
The maker is Darth Vader.
The what?
The maker is Darth Vader, as you say in the
Absolutely. So this was fascinating to me that it was Darth Vader who created 3PO. And I thought that was a really neat thing. Somebody created a puppet figure, so I did, and who animated it. I added the voice, you know. My favorite line was, Arthur goes, beep, 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 it. What do you mean, naked? My parts are showing. Oh, my. And actually, there was another cute line, which is 3PO kind of wobbles forward. It may be that this planet is not entirely stable. You know, it's a typical line of 3PO that he blames everything else. It's not him that's his problem. It's a really cute line. I wish I'd written it. I didn't. And then, so we did that. And of course, episode 1 opened to mixed reactions, because George had quite deliberately made characters that appealed to 10-year-old children, partly because his son Jet was 10 years old at the time, and if it was okay with Jet, it was okay with George. Okay. But we moved swiftly on to episode 2, in which I did say, well, I would like to animate the puppet because it's my character, if you will. So I wore this tremendously heavy puppet on my front and used as a technique rather like bunraku, a Japanese form of art where the puppeteer is totally visible but wearing black. In this case, I was strapped to the puppet, feet, knees, waist. The arms were on sticks, the head attached to the puppet's head. So I was behind him at all times, which made looking at somebody in front of me very difficult because I couldn't see them. This was all fine and kind of interesting until the day when at Anakin's home, I was introducing everybody to everybody, and I said, this floor is rocky, it's uneven, can we put some floorboards down? Which you often do on a film set. And they said, we haven't got any boards, so we did it. 5 times I was perfect in introducing people to people. It was my close-up now. I walked forward, tripped, and crashed from here to there in what, about 2 seconds. I was in shock. I had smashed the puppet, the only puppet in the world. Hugely valuable, and we were in the middle of filming. And then Don Bees, who used to look after me, said, well, it's your close-up. And he cut the costume in half with, you know, mechanical stuff. And so for that scene, I actually just wore the top half, and I could go anywhere I wanted. It was so easy. I really liked it. They eventually put the character back together, and he also is in a museum exhibit. And then, of course, George decided, well, there was a wonderful scene with Padme where she said, you know, are you happy here in Tatooine? Not really, you know. It's not easy being naked, if you'll pardon the expression. And then she was the one who said, but there's a box of coverings right here. So she dressed him up. And it was a really cute scene because there was Natalie Portman just giving 3PO bits of costume. And in comes Aunt Beru and Uncle O and all the others. Everyone was really happy. And then George just cut the whole thing. So there was no time. More important to go killing sand people. And so then I had to go back into the original wearing a rusty 3PO suit. And that was a gold suit painted rusty by Justin Dix. And I had to redo every scene I had shot as the puppet on a blue screen, as you do. So I had to remember where people had been, and then they put it all together. So then we move on, and of course, you know, come up, and suddenly there are going to be 3 more films. And then we go through those, and we have just had the best time making The Rise of Skywalker, the best time. And for me, a few months ago, on a Monday night, in a scene where 3PO had no lines, nothing to say, he was just part of the scene, suddenly, it's over. It's finished. And that was quite difficult. And I realized, speaking to the crew who were saying goodbye, JJ made a little speech, and I made a little speech, and I realized that I had said goodbye for the 3rd time, that I thought after episode 6, that was the end. I thought after episode 3, that was the end. And suddenly, episode 9, that was the end. 3PO had a very stiff upper lip. Me, it's a little more difficult. So it does feel like a journey. And actually, as we know, I have written a book. Did you know this? I have written a book. And there's a big discussion because DK, who are publishing the book in October, wanted it to be called I Am C-3PO. This is the front cover. And the funny thing is, it's not my title. I see why they wanted it, because he's always introducing himself. Hello, I am C-3PO, human-cyborg relations. So he's always talking about himself in that way. They said, Star Wars fans will get your title, but not everybody who doesn't know all about Star Wars title. You need another one. And so you may have heard that my title that I wanted is Telling the Odds. I've only seen bits of The Rise of Skywalker. I believe it is going to be my favorite film, partly because I had a lot of fun doing it. But until that point, it was episode 4, the very first one. And the reason is I could understand it. It was quite simple. There was a bad guy, there was a bunch of good guys. The bad guy worked for a big, nasty organization. The good guys wanted to, stop it. It was simplistic, simple. With very defined characters. You had the Wookiee, you had the bad guy, you had the hero, Mark Hamill, Luke Skywalker. You had the kind of cowboy figure, Harrison Ford, Han Solo. And of course you had pretty much the one girl in it, I think, Princess Leia, Carrie Fisher. And then you had the droids who were almost human because, I hope I'm not disturbing you. So they were very defined figures. Most intelligent people like episode 5, what was it called? Empire Strikes Back, thank you so much. I get too many titles now. And they all have so many words in them. Intelligent people like that. We had a wonderful director, Irving Kershner, who brought such an intelligence to the whole thing. And so it gone on, and then to my mind, there became too many Jedi and people I don't know who they are, and I don't really care. Everybody had a lightsaber suddenly. So my favorite was episode 4.
It perceptibly got darker, didn't it?
It did, it got darker, certainly into Empire, yes. You had all that sort of psychological stuff with Luke Skywalker, and I think it was there that he heard that I am your father. Is that right? Not that the actor inside the costume said that on the set, because they didn't dare give him the real line, because he would have told everybody. It's a problem, secrecy on a set. You have to trust the actors not to tell the press or anything, and indeed that particular person did tell the press later on when he found out what the real line was, which, why would you do that? Why would you spoil people's surprises? I don't know. It's hugely unprofessional, and I don't mind being quoted on that. Keep the secret. You know, I could tell you the entire story, I think I could, it's quite complicated, the entire story of the rise of Skywalker, but why would I spoil it, you know? Why would I spoil it? Wait to see, it's exciting, yes. So there we are. I hope that number 9 will be my favorite, yeah. Another question.
So far, hearing everything that you've talked about George, he doesn't sound like a very nice guy. Is that true?
George is a lovely guy. You know, don't get me wrong, George. Why do you say that?
Because every time you say he's talking, he's like, yeah.
Oh, no, that's just the way, George, he was kind of low energy talking. His energy is in the miracle. No, you're totally wrong. No, he just is he's very quiet, contained. His brilliance, he created this out of nothing. All right, he'd done a lot of research, a lot of reading about psychology, philosophy, storytelling, myths, legends, going way back into Greek culture, into Roman culture and so on, into Nordic culture. So he put it all together. And they were all on display forever and ever and ever, but he took, rather like a chef in a kitchen, taking the same ingredients cooked by other people, but he put them together in a different order and in a particular ethos or background, if you will. And he knitted something completely different and new out of the same old stories, but he put them together very cleverly. And he created, if you think about it, he created something that we're talking about in great detail. The sandbox that he created, where children and adults play with Lego, recreating scenes because they are reliving, replaying the adventures and the fun. So no, he's a brilliant guy and a very nice guy and very kind. He's very shy. His work is on film, you know. That's why you see him interviewed. He's not always comfortable in public. His work is what you see on screen. So totally wrong there. Another question. Yeah.
How was the atmosphere and the energy between the other actors during the original trilogy and also the new movies?
How was the
Any memories during the set?
It's very good. It's a slightly funny question. One thing amuses me is people, you know, think we must all hang out together. You know, I don't know, spending the whole time in bars, restaurants, in each other's homes. No, when you're filming, certainly out on location, you know, we were getting up, Mark and I would drive to work in the dark, because as you arrived onto that desert location, the sun would be beginning to come up, because when that sun comes up, you want to be ready to use it. That's why you're there. You're there for the backgrounds, wonderful, but you're there also to use the natural sunlight that is the gift of being there. And in Jordan just now, we would drive out, and on the way, suddenly the driver's cell phone, to my amazement, would start with the Mesuin's call to prayer as dawn came up. And as we approached into the desert, so the sky would light. And that means by the time everybody's ready, the sun is where you want it and where you need it. And you go home as the sun is setting. Except, of course, sunset is one of the major times on a film set. It's called the golden hour. That as the sun comes down here, it permeates through the layers of the atmosphere and takes on a reddish orange hue, and particularly my suit looks wonderful at sunset. And there is something that speaks to us as humans about the lighting at sunset. It's the end. It's another end of a day is that people used to think it was the end of the world, the end of life. And there's something deep within us, atavistic, that speaks to us about sunset. It's a kind of sweetly melancholy, beautiful time. So you want to be there, and occasionally, and I am thinking of a particular shot, occasionally you want to, actually, you want to use that sunset time. So what that means is, I was amused that in Aqaba, where we were staying in Jordan, we were in a beautiful hotel, like a palace, and our rooms were on the front looking out over the Gulf of Aqaba. But when I looked down about 8 floors, there was the big bar out by the water or whatever, and I thought, that's going to be really noisy, you know, it's going to echo up. No. By 8 o'clock in the evening, it was empty because everybody went to bed, because they were going to get up at 4:30 in the morning to go out to be ready for us coming out at 6 o'clock. So my point is that you might eat lunch together, but you might be in your trailer having it privately resting, learning lines, getting ready. So you don't have that much time to socialize. Then we all live in different countries and so on. So you come together on the set and there's lots of laughter and rehearsal and stuff. But then you do the scene. Then, of course, you do it this way, and then you do it this way, and then you do it this way, that way, and a 2-shot there. So each scene you're repeating 6, 7 setups. And within that setup, you might be doing 14 takes. And JJ used to drive me crazy because we would do a scene. He'd say, that's terrific, terrific, excellent, excellent. One more time. And he would say that next time. That's really good. Let's just do one more. And suddenly, one more became 2 more, became 4, 5, 6, 7, 14 takes. But he finally would get that thing he wanted. And he would use 2 seconds of that shot, but 3 seconds of that shot, and 4 seconds. Next time you watch the movies, watch how many cuts there are in each scene. And it makes you really feel part of the action. It makes it a huge play area. And each one has to be lit, specially for that close-up, for your close-up, for my two-shot, so on. So there's a lot of work you don't see. The atmosphere on the set, joyous. And a lot of that comes down to JJ in this case, because he made it nice. He made it happy for everybody. And then we all make it happy for each other. And particularly Oscar Isaac and I, he just made me laugh all the time. He's very naughty. He's brilliant. One of his skills is you're not quite sure when he started acting because he just talks normally and then you realize, oh, he's saying the script. And it's like, oh, we started. He's a very natural actor. It's lovely. Another question. Yeah. Yeah, from somebody from Luton, you got a lot to say.
Well,
and that's great. Go.
Not until we got here.
Not until we got here.
As you're talking,
Yeah.
The previous press conference with the Game of Thrones, they were talking about being a family,
Yeah.
with the behind the scenes, with the crew, with the cast. Was that the same with Star Wars?
I'm going to make a horrible admission. I've never seen, please don't quote me, I've never seen Game of Thrones. Oh, okay. But I gather they shoot mostly in a studio in Northern Ireland, I think, and they have a real base. And because it's a TV series, it's not an individual film. In an individual film, you come together for a moment, and certainly when you have a visitor, a new character on the set, he or she may only be there a couple of days, do you see? And then they go back to their home, whether it's LA or Australia or whatever. I think on a TV show, it's more cohesive as a group, because it's, I got told off for using the word soap opera the other day. I didn't know that was a rude thing to say. Apparently it's, is it? Apparently. Is it not? Okay. Well, quite. If you're in one, it's good news. I believe the word continuing drama is what we say. You know, all the old words are leaving us. We can't say anything anymore without offending somebody. It's very tiresome. So we all knew, we were a family on set. if you will, but often we weren't all together all of the time. People, because you see a film, everybody's all together. No, if you're a baddie in one of the scenes, you're only there for a day, and it's very nice to meet you, but goodbye. Do you see? No? Another question.
I was going to say,
Yeah.
so episode 9 brings the saga to an end, but Disney now is starting the Disney Plus platform. They're going to be having all the films on and new series like The Mandalorian that was up in Chicago. So will we see C-3PO coming back, do you think?
Well, will we see C-3PO coming back in the extended material? You know, one of the difficulties of being in any of these movies or productions is that your life is secret until it comes out on a big or small screen. You can't tell people. Interestingly, back at episode 4, the Star Wars, as it was called on my script, I was there on set at Elstree Studios and so on. I didn't tell my friends what I was doing. I just sort of said, well, I'm in this rather silly science fiction thing, and because they were all like at the Royal Shakespeare Company or the National Theatre or whatever, being proper actors, you know. And I felt a bit like, But it wasn't, nothing was a secret. You could have walked on the set and, you know, nobody cared. Absolutely nobody cared. It was no big deal. Then it opened, and then secrecy came in, and it was pretty rigorous secrecy, but not as rigorous as later on under JJ's regime, because he is notorious for wanting to really hold the secrets. I was one of the few people to be allowed a script which was white paper with black ink on it, because with my eyes I found it very, very difficult to read black on red. And that is red scripts of security, because you can't read over somebody's shoulder and you can't photocopy it and whatever. And then, and it's very good because very few secrets have got out of this latest film, which means you will be surprised by what happens when you see it, as you should be surprised. Yeah, absolutely, look forward to it. It did make life a little difficult, and often I would go into our temporary accommodation, our tent, our what do we call them? My easy up tent, you know, the white things. And I would say to Sophie and Joe, my 2 assistants, oh, this is the scene where, and they go, what? I said, oh God, you haven't read the script, have you? just read what we're doing, because they were going to be standing next to me, making sure I was all right whilst I'm saying the line. So why wouldn't I just show them the script, you know? Totally trustworthy, whatever. But there are people who go around studios, you know, it may be an actor, takes a photograph inappropriately, or it may be a security guard in the middle of the night, just takes a picture of something, and then puts it out on the public thing, just to be big. I can spoil this. Or sometimes, and the word drone, and suddenly we had umbrellas, and because people would fly drones over the set. And the funny thing was to see, what, 50, 100 stormtroopers coming out of their dressing building, which would be like this. So they'd all come out, stormtroopers, except they would all be covered in big black robes and hoods, and they would have a bag with their stormtrooper hat in it. And it was like some strange religious cult on the move. Far more scary than stormtroopers. They looked sinister, you know, like Knights Templar or something, or I don't know. So security, and literally people would come and put an umbrella over my head to make sure people couldn't film us. Yeah. So security, yes. Another what was your question? Forgotten now.
Well, I was going to say, if somebody comes and tells you, would you like to reprise the role of C-3PO?
Oh, I see. Would I? Yeah. I would be. Yes, of course, I'm very fond of this character. How could I not be? Right now, I feel it was very intense shooting the last film. Yeah, I have a continuing presence, of course. It's Star. Has anybody been on Star Tours at Disney? So we have a continuing program there, and I will be recording another episode shortly. That's great. And I was working with Lego a couple of weeks ago, and then we have the book to discuss, because once you read that, you'll have lots of questions. I never thought I would write a book. Isn't that weird? Isn't that weird? Fortunately for spell check, you know, it's okay. How anybody wrote a book before computers were involved, I don't know. Anyway, so yes, I would be very happy. I would not like 3PO to disappear from this planet. I think the planet needs him, so let's hope it's okay. No, any questions?
Yeah.
Welcome, finally. Thank you for coming. It's good? Okay, yes. No idea. Yes.
I would like to add something to your previous comment about secrecy. 'Cause I happened to be at Pinewood while the 7th film was being filmed, and there were like black curtains everywhere. No one, like even in the cafeteria, it was sort of frowned upon to even mention Star Wars. It was a really weird vibe about even mentioning Star Wars. So,
yeah, you have to get used to, if you're in one of these films, you have to get used to not talking about it. Even with friends, you really can't share your life. You just say, oh, I had a really tough day on the set, but you can't say why, that you were running about or it was in sand. One of the things drove me crazy. After 3 weeks in Jordan, we came back to England and all our clothes were just riddled with red sand, and it took ages to like wash and dust and sweep up. And then a few weeks later, they go and recreate part of the set at the studio. Suddenly there is the red sand, hugely bright lights to make look like sunshine. And suddenly we're back in our apartments getting the sand out again. It was kind of weird. But again, totally clever that with the skill of filmmaking, you won't know the difference from being in Jordan and being at Pinewood, yeah.
so yeah, my question would be, before all this, before it became such a huge deal and people trying to steal 15 seconds of, was there a moment where you doubted what this thing might have been? Or
Was there a moment? I'm sure you know that when we were shooting the Star Wars, because it started off The Adventures of Luke Starkiller. That's when I first came into it. 6 months later, it had become The Star Wars. Then at some point it became Star Wars. Then it became Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. And back then they would have had to keep changing. It was digital, so they'd have to keep changing the celluloid film, do you see? When we were filming, I mean, famously, it's in the book, Mark and I were being driven into the desert, and as the light got more, we could go through each other's lines, just rehearsing, you know. And he said something, and I said, how can you say this line with a straight face? And he said, well, look what you have to say. And I said, yeah, but I've got a mask on. None of my friends know I'm saying this stuff. You know, and it was true, because some of the lines were cringe-making, you know. Oh, curse my metal body, I wasn't fast enough, Otto. That's one of my least favorite lines. We did it. We were all professional actors. Carrie Fisher, Mark Hamill, Harrison Ford. We were being paid to act. We weren't going to mess about on the set. We did it with great sincerity, as you can see from their faces, and hopefully my performance, not my face. So we did it all well, but, you know, we would just mutter at each other. How can you say this rubbish? Famous line from Harrison Ford, you can type it, but you can't speak it, you know. And I couldn't say my first line, which was, my first job was programming binary load lifters, very similar to your operators in many respects. And I couldn't get it out. I just couldn't say it. We did 3 takes until George came and said, don't worry about it. I can fix it later. Yeah, don't worry about the voice. And then, of course, I found out he didn't want to use my voice, that he wanted a completely different robot. But he never said, I hate your performance, can you do something else? But that's what he thought. And then he found, magically, that 3PO really was 3PO. And part of it was the way I moved, and part of it was his voice, which is quite strange, really. And he found that no other voice worked as well as my voice. And finally, they flew me over to LA, where I had jet lag for the first time in my life. I'd never flown that far. And I always wonder, because I remember in LA, I was wide awake at 2 in the morning, wide awake and famished. It was the sort of hotel that didn't have food, you know. It was 40-something years ago, a Holiday Inn on Wilshire Boulevard. And I was starving hungry, and I just had to put up with it. And of course, the next day, I found out there was a 24-hour restaurant a couple of blocks down the road, Ship's Restaurant. Had you ever heard of a 24-hour restaurant? Back in the day, everything closed, what, 6 o'clock, 8 o'clock? But eventually I got to the studio and watched my performance. And I'd done that voice on the set, but of course it's different watching yourself on the screen. And I always wonder whether 3PO sounds kind of tense because he was so jet-lagged. I was sort of, fighting through tiredness all the time. And now I'm stuck with the voice, and it is quite tense to do because he, being a nervous character, he's all tense here and here and here, and a little in the back of the throat. And often his scenes are full of energy and fear, and so it's quite intense, and often on one breath of air, because one of the differences between robots and humans is, apart from going to the bathroom, one of the differences, give me a, with a brain, that's the other thing about actors, some of them do have brains. Okay, what's a big difference between robots and humans?
Well, feelings, I would say.
Feelings, and as one of the things about the character is that you're suddenly watching something that is really a machine who appears to be sentient, who has feelings, who has emotions, and that was such a shock for people, That was in the writing. George made that up. I exacerbated it, I made it bigger, but that was his theory. But I think our young lady from Luton just said something.
But don't breathe.
Robots don't breathe. And it's interesting because slightly, to make sense of a sentence or a series of phrases, you need to put in a pause to make it sound logical. Otherwise, it's a stream of conscious to make it sound logical, and you're missing out the punctuation, if you will. But often we take those punctuation breaks to make a breath. And believe me, we were talking about getting out of breath. So you can't have that. But, of course, in editing, if I mean, the radio series was the worst because 3PO had huge amounts to say. And I would so run out of breath. But, of course, you can cut all that out. But you're absolutely right. Robots don't breathe. Oh, and I just remembered something. I hope I put, yes, I have. We were doing some very cold scene. We were in the cold, real cold. And I realized that I could see all the other actors in the scene with me. And you could see their breath, their exhalation in the cold. And I thought, but they're going to see 3PO breathing. So that was difficult. I had to really think about that one, You don't want to see breath coming out of 3PO's mouth. That would give the game away. Yeah.
I have another question. How different do you think your career or even your life would have been without C3PO?
100% different. How different how would we know? But I was I was playing roles that really didn't matter, that, as I say, there would have been a strange pause had I not been there. Not very rewarding roles. I was acting, which is what I wanted to do. And suddenly when 3PO came along and was gifted to me, in spite of the fact that I didn't want to be in it, remember that, something happened. And it wasn't entirely comfortable. In fact, it was entirely uncomfortable in many ways. You can read about it in the book. Suddenly I realized I had been given this gift from somewhere. Via George, via whatever, but some kind of space magic, call it the Force if you want. Some power of some kind had taken over and brings me here today. I never expected this to happen. I have no idea. I doubt I would be acting now because if you look at television and films, there are so many wonderful actors that are just utterly believable in so many stories. So I have no idea, but I don't think I would still be in the industry. Maybe I would be behind the camera in some way, which is very exciting also. Yeah. Do you have a question?
Yeah, sort of linked to a previous question. Was there a specific point in time or something specific that happened after the release of the first movie
that made you realize just how big of a phenomenon this
Was there a specific thing at the end, the opening of the first movie? Nobody told me it had opened. It opened, I think, 6 months ahead in America. Doesn't happen anymore now. Partly because of Star Wars, because English people were really ticked off that all this stuff in America was happening and nobody... Back then, distribution was different and Star Wars changed it. Just as Star Wars changed the number of people you see on the credit roll at the end of a movie. You look at that original film, it was made by about 10 people. That really annoyed all the other people who've been involved in that movie. They worked hard on it. So now you get these endless rolls, gone a little crazy. And the first thing I knew was seeing the cover of Time or Newsweek or something. Nobody told me. First time I saw it was at a crew screening. And I was amazed because there were so many things that were a surprise. Then a few months later I went over to Hollywood to put his footprints in the cement. And they're still there. You can go outside Grauman's Theatre, yeah. Extremely hot day, thousands of people. It wasn't a great experience, but they're still there. I go and see them sometimes, stand there, nobody recognizes me, I walk on. So that was the first I knew, yeah. And was really surprised by that. I have got to apologize now because in 6 minutes I have to be somewhere else. But my wife Christine will now pass amongst you with souvenir covers of the book, which is not my title. So remember that. I'm wondering if they're going to change it, but I don't think so. This is the book what wrote itself. It's sort of the stories, and when you read it, if you read it, you'll see it's written in my voice. It's like I've been talking to you today. I have broken all the rules of punctuation. I have one-word sentences. I think that's good. You don't have to. You can always borrow a copy. So I'm only going to finish because I've got to go somewhere else. Thank you very much for your questions. Thank you.
Once again, that was Anthony Daniels, Mr. C3PO. What an honor it is to have him amongst us. We're going to keep on going and doing interviews throughout the day. We're here until 5 today. Don't forget to log in, tell your friends, share, and we'll see you soon.